these as well. So, this is about Matilda, the Conqueror's queen. Now, she was the wife of William the Conqueror, the Norman, who famously defeated Harold in battle at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 and became King of England. So this is an article by Tracy Borman, and she says that England wasn't entirely consumed by violence in the years following the Norman Conquest is a tribute to the diplomatic skills of William the First's wife, Matilda. Tracy Borman hails a woman who inspired a new model of queenship. So in this picture we can see William of Normandy feasts with members of his army after landing in England on his campaign of conquest 1066 in this scene from the Bayeux Tapestry. So here she is, the statue of Matilda, Queen of England, and the benevolent counterweight to William the First's brutality in the gardens of Paris's Palais de Luxembourg. Let's have a read. In late autumn 1066, a diminutive woman of 35 prayed fervently in the Benedictine Priory of Notre Dame to pray, a small chapel that she had founded in 1060 on the banks of the River Seine, near Rouen. Flanked by her ladies, she had spent many hours at her devotions during the previous few days. It was with good cause that she had kept such an anxious vigil. Her husband, William the Bastard, Duke of Normandy, had set sail from England more than 2 weeks before, determined to wrest the throne from Harold Godwinson. At last a messenger arrived with news that her prayers had been answered. William and his Norman army had triumphed over the Saxons at Senlac Hill, close to the town of Hastings, by which the battle would henceforth be known. She, Matilda, was now not just Duchess of Normandy, but Queen of England. Upon hearing the momentous tidings, Matilda joyfully proclaimed that the priory should henceforth be known as Notre Dame du Bon Neufel, Our Lady of Good News. She had good reason to rejoice. The crown of England was a glittering prize that even she, with her overweening ambition, could not possibly have hoped for when she had become the wife of the base-born Duke of Normandy some 15 years earlier. But Hastings, decisive as it was, marked the start, not the end, of William's campaign to conquer England. It would take years of bitter fighting before he was finally able to establish a measure of control over the country. advisers urged that he could brook no delay, and his coronation went ahead before Matilda was able to leave Normandy. Matilda was every bit as eager as William to establish herself in England, and had already begun to style herself Queen, but it was not until the spring of 1068 that she finally arrived in her new kingdom. The delay had been caused not just by the demands of her regency in Normandy, but also her role as matriarch of the Norman dynasty. She had fallen pregnant shortly before William's departure for England in 1066, resulting in the birth of a daughter, Adela, and by the time she landed on English soil, she was pregnant once more. The new Queen's arrival in England was noted by the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, which referred to her derisively as the Lady Matilda, while her new subjects called her the Strange Woman. Their suspicion was rooted in the fact that she was spoken of as La Royne by the Normans, which implies that she was a female sovereign in her own right. This was shocking to her new subjects. Previous English queens had been referred to merely as the king's wife. Opulent spectacle. Undeterred, Matilda threw herself into the task of bringing much-needed glamour to her husband's court. A magnificent gathering was held at Winchester to celebrate Easter, and another at Westminster shortly afterwards, attended by a host of English notables. Even the anti-Norman chroniclers could not help but be impressed by the opulent spectacle that the couple presented, clad from head to toe in gold and encrusted robes, and eating their sumptuous meals from gold and silver platters. As soon as these celebrations were out of the way, plans began in earnest for the main purpose of Matilda's visit, her coronation. The event was loaded with significance, besides being vital to William's efforts to reinforce his legitimacy in the eyes of his new subjects. Matilda would be the first Queen of England to be formally styled Regina. Her coronation was also the first ever staged just for a queen, and Matilda was determined that it should eclipse her husband's in splendour and magnificence. Every detail was planned with meticulous care. Special lauds or ritual chants were written for the occasion, declaring that Matilda shared William's authority. Never before had a queen's power been so formalised or so equal to that of the king. It was a sign of things to come. The new queen's presence did not immediately establish order in England. Barely were the coronation celebrations out of the way than fresh trouble had broken out in the north of the kingdom. Fearing a rebellion, William hastened to York, the principal city of the north, from where he could prepare his own forces to quell any uprisings. Matilda had no intention of staying behind in the relatively safe confines of the court in London. Sensing an opportunity to win over their recalcitrant subjects, she decided to join her husband in Yorkshire. This involved a journey of some 200 miles on roads that were little more than mud tracks, a considerable enough feat in itself. Alone, for a woman who was by references in Domesday Book to her hearing English legal cases during William's absences, which became increasingly frequent during the 1070s. The impressive variety of English charters in which Matilda was involved attests to her versatility in business matters. The Queen was also at the heart of some of the most important religious debates of the reign, notably when she and her husband ordered that the primacy of York should be subject to the authority of the Archbishop of Canterbury, a symbolic ruling which effectively brought the North under the control of the court in London. Ever sensitive to the mood of the English people, though, she subsequently made a series of generous bequests to the Church. In so doing, she won praise from the chroniclers, who described her as munificent and liberal of her gifts, and indefatigable at alleviating distress in every shape. Spoils of conquest. Matilda's liberality set her apart from the other members of the Norman ruling elite who had shared in the spoils of the conquest, and whereas her husband and his Norman entourage relied upon interpreters, she made the effort to master the English language, a fact that greatly endeared her to the native population. As well as winning popularity in her own right, Matilda also gradually succeeded in persuading her husband to adopt a more conciliatory stance towards his conquered subjects. King William, by the advice of Matilda, treated the English kindly as long as she lived, observed one contemporary. When Edward the Confessor's widow Edith, who had long been a figurehead for the Saxon regime, died in 1075, Matilda urged William to arrange for her remains to be conveyed from Winchester to Westminster with great honour, so that she might be interred in the abbey next to her husband. There a tomb, lavishly decorated with gold and silver, was erected, and William also paid for a suitably ostentatious funeral. By the time of her last sojourn into England, in 1081, Matilda had earned widespread admiration among the people. A consummate diplomat, she had steadily and patiently overcome their initial suspicion with a brilliantly executed public relations campaign. Whereas in the early days of her reign she had been dismissed as William's gabed or bedfellow, now she was known as the Queen of the English. domestic sphere, her successors were able to play an active part in the political, judicial and spiritual life of their kingdoms for centuries to come. Very interesting. So let's have a look at some of the pictures that we've missed. So we have William orders fortifications to be built at Hastings in the Bayeux Tapestry. While he was campaigning in England, the Duke left Normandy in the hands of his wife. Now, this section, Matilda, how much do we know? So this picture is the Abbey of La Trinité in Caen, where Matilda's skeleton was discovered in 1961. Although the lives of medieval women are typically obscure, there is a surprisingly rich collection of sources of Matilda's career as Duchess of Normandy and Queen of England. Principal among them are the Chronicles. The 11th and early 12th centuries were a time of intense activity among monastic historians, and their accounts vividly and often salaciously bring to life the characters and events of Matilda's story. These are supported by the charters to which she put her name, as well as her husband's ambitious survey of England known as Domesday Book, and the unique record of the Bayeux Tapestry, which was for many years believed to be the work of Matilda and her ladies. Sadly, there are few clues to Matilda's appearance, although all of the chroniclers shows the